In this video, we will do the topic the abolition of slavery. Abolition of slavery is the topic from French Revolution, chapter 1, standard 9. Abolition of slavery. Abolition means removal. Slavery is a gulamgiri. It was one of the main steps, it was one of the revolutionary steps that was taken by the Jacobians in the French colonies. The removal of slavery was one of the most important social reforms that was done by the Jacobians in the French colonies. Some of the colonies like Caribbean, they were the important suppliers of commodities such as tobacco, indigo, sugar and coffee. Now we have an example of a colony called Caribbean, and it was an important supplier of commodities like tobacco, indigo, sugar and coffee. Sugar, coffee, indigo and tobacco were supplied from the Caribbean. Now the problem is that there was a shortage of labor in these plantations. Shortage of labor means there was the shortage of workers to work in these plantations, and this shortage was removed, or the problem of shortage of worker was removed by a triangular slave trade. And this triangular slave trade was between Europe, Africa and America. Now three countries were involved. That is why it is a triangular slave trade. The triangular slave trade was carried between Europe, Africa and America. So these three continents were involved, and so it was a triangular slave trade. And this triangular slave trade was to solve the problem of the shortage of labor in the colonies. The slave trade began in the 17th century, and it was the French merchants who sailed from the ports of Bordeaux or Nantes. So two ports we have, Bordeaux or Nantes. From these two ports, the French merchants they traveled to the East African coast, and they brought slaves from the local merchants. It means the French merchants they sailed from the ports of Bordeaux and Athens to the African coast, and from there they brought slaves from the local chieftains. Due to this slave trade, the growing demand of sugar, coffee and indigo in the European market was met. Now there was a great demand. There was a huge demand for sugar, tea and coffee, and this was met by the slave trade. The slave trade provides workers to work in the plantations. And the two ports that we have studied, the port of Bordeaux and Nantes, they became rich due to this slave trade. And it was the National Assembly that held long debates about whether the rights of man should be extended to all the French subjects, including those in the colonies. It means that the National Assembly that was framed, and this National Assembly they had large discussions and debates, and the discussion and debate was regarding the extension of the rights of man and citizens, whether these rights must be extended to those areas where in the colonies where people were living, to the slaves it meant. But it did not pass any laws because they feared that they would get oppositions from the businessmen. Now what does this mean? The National Assembly they held long debates and discussions whether the slavery must be declared illegal or not. The National Assembly they held large discussions and debates on the issue of slavery. They wanted that the slave trade must come to an end, but they did not pass any laws because they feared that if they pass laws, businessmen will oppose them. Businessmen they cannot function without slave trade. So it was finally the convention, the Jacobins government that was formed. It was finally the convention that passed a law in 1794, and by this law slavery was abolished in all the French colonies. So the convention in 1794 passed a law in which all the slave trade or a slavery was abolished in the French colonies. But Napoleon, this was only a short-term issue, this was only a short-term measure. Napoleon once again introduced slavery in 1804. Convention abolished slavery in 1794 by passing a law that in all French colonies the slavery will be abolished. It was only for a short period of time. Napoleon reintroduced slavery in 1804. Now it was finally that Napoleon reintroduced slavery in 1804. It was finally in 1848 that slavery was finally abolished in France. So what does the entire topic suggest? It suggests the slavery was important in the French colonies because due to slavery, the French due to slavery, the problem of workers in the plantation was solved, and due to slavery, the ports of Bordeaux and Athens, they became important, and it is because of slavery that the demand for tea, coffee and indigo was met in the European market. But according to the rights of Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, all the citizens in France must be getting equal rights. So it was the National Assembly that held large amount of debates that the rights of men should also be extended to the French subjects and in the colonies, and so they held long debates and discussions about to decrease or reduce or end slavery. But it did not pass any laws because they feared that they would get opposition from businessmen. And it was in 1794 when the convention they passed a law that slavery will be ended in France, the French colonies. But Napoleon once again he reintroduced slavery in 1804, and slavery was finally abolished in the French colonies in 1848. Thus the slavery came to an end. Now we have a small topic of revolution and the everyday life. Here we will discuss about a censorship law. A censorship law is a restriction that is imposed on the freedom of speech and expression. Means a restriction is imposed on the freedom of speech and expression, that is called censorship law. So censorship law was there in France before 1789. The period of before 1789 is the period called Old Regime. This Old Regime period saw censorship laws in which the media, the print were not allowed to be circulated freely. And this censorship law came to an end after storming of the Bastille, that is after 1789. The censorship law was abolished and the people got the right to express themselves. So in the old regime, all literary materials and cultural activities like the books, the newspapers, the plays could not be published or performed at will. Before performing these, permission from the king has to be taken because of the censorship laws. But after the removal of these censorship laws, newspapers, pamphlets, books, printed materials, they started coming to the market. The people, they started discussing, they started having a debate on the events and changes that have taken place in France. Freedom of press means that people, they could express themselves freely, and people started expressing themselves freely because of the censorship law that was removed after the storming of the Bastille. Freedom of press was there, and so people, they started expressing themselves. Plays, songs and festive procession attracted many large number of people, and the people, they started expressing themselves because of the end of the censorship laws. So the topic, the first one that we have done, that is the abolition of slavery, is the important topic for 1 marks, and this is also an important topic for map work, where you have Bordeaux and Athens has to be plotted in a map of France. And a short topic of censorship law. In this topic, we would have to do the meaning of censorship law. Then we have to do the date. We have to mention the date when this censorship law came to an end, and up till when this censorship law was there, and what was the impact of censorship law on the French society.